Okay, hi. So this is my summary of the last few reading groups that we've had yesterday. So this is now Friday. Yesterday we had two groups of the class joined together to discuss this paper. So we discussed speech bubbles, enhancing captioning experiences for deaf and hard of hearing people in group conversations. So it was actually really interesting. So, like a huge thank you to people who were able to join and contribute to that. So, what I would like to do is, I've got some notes here. I'd like to first of all give you an idea of how I use uh, papers, how I go through them, how I read them, what sort of things I'm looking for, and then I've got some summary of the paper discussions that we had the other day, just so that everyone's maybe more caught up in the kinds of topics that we were discussing. So before I start, I have an orchid update, and the orchid update is that the orchid's still kind of sad. It's still yellow and it still has this hole. The hole happened a long time ago. I dropped something on the plant and it kind of survived and there was no drama. But yeah, we have this new leaf, I think. So I'm hopeful, but we're not there yet. I've cut all the dead stems off and stuff. So fingers crossed. Next update coming next week. We'll put that back over there. So uh, back to the paper. So the paper is from the CHI conference. It's from CHI 2018. So that was held in Montreal. So CHI papers typically are kind of in this year it was 4 to 10 pages plus references. So that means that on this top of page 11, you can start your references. Of course, you can make it less than that. So this is about 8.5 pages long. So bear that in mind because I think there's places where more information would have been useful, and that's probably what that space could have been used for. So what I'm looking for when I read a paper is I'll read the abstract, I'll read the introduction, and I'll read the conclusion. If I get what I need from that, and I think yes, that the information is there and it's a kind of paper that will be helpful for me, I'll then start to read the rest. Often I'm kind of focused on getting one or two bits of information rather than reading the whole thing. But what I think I pay most attention to is I pay most attention to the introduction. So the introduction should really be a summary of the whole thing. So you should highlight what the problem is that's worth solving. What is it that you're going to do? And the problem here is that deaf and hard of hearing individuals have difficulties when they're engaged in group conversations, simultaneous utterances, and speakers that are out of view. So that's the problem that we're trying to fix. But then, is it a problem worth solving? Right? If I'm the government and I'm given money to research, what's the motivation? So the motivation is tied very closely to the impact. So impact is a thing that you hear all of the time in research community, and it means what difference does it make to people's lives? Okay, what is the impact? So in this case, the motivation is to reduce potentially social exclusion or to get people more involved in conversations and groups where there's benefits. So if you consider like group work at uni, right, you couldn't really get through without being able to do it. So that's going to be a point at which someone who's deaf or hard of hearing would be excluded. You then want to outline what the solution is. So the solution was to create speech bubbles, but what were the steps to get there? So part one, we did some kind of understanding phase. So you'll see that's kind of quite similar to the stuff that I said that we maybe do in the UX group. Is we're looking for an understanding of a particular user group within a particular context. We're looking at, so that's kind of the first step. The second step was designing the prototypes and then evaluating them on the monitor. And the third step was the evaluation. So once you've got all of these things, how did you evaluate it? So you need to have some detail in there about, we evaluated this using this method and we found that. Then you want to list your contributions. So in this paper, you'll see that I've written all over it. You'll see that I've just kind of highlighted things. I've asked myself questions. You can see in some places I've just maybe like given myself more information or a reminder. Like I kept getting lost how many participants were in each stage, for example. So I've got a question. How is it analysed? What did they actually do? So what was I looking for? Contributions. The contributions of the system include addressing the limitations of existing static and dynamic caption and subtitle systems that are limited to preset filmed videos, so the fact that it's live is important. And it addresses the limitations of existing assistive interfaces that do not closely capture seamless face-to-face group conversation experiences with hearing individuals. So this kind of mixed group where some people have a hearing impairment and some people do not is important, because a lot of these solutions in the past have been specifically to facilitate communication within the deaf community and not looking at that kind of social input and output within different communities, so in this case the hearing community. Okay, so once you have all of those things, that's your introduction. What is in that introduction should just be expanded into different sections throughout the paper. There's usually a kind of set structure in that it's we designed something, we then evaluated something, and here is our results and analysis. Kai in particular is interested in things that we made a thing and then we evaluated the thing. So the thing can be an algorithm, it can be something that abstract, it can be an interface, it can be an entire physical system, it can be an app, it can be anything. What the thing is very broad. You do also get kind of publications of position papers. So position papers are someone who's done a review of the literature and wants to share their opinion on that, or kind of a call to action to say that, well, look, there are these gaps and we all need to work together to solve them. But Kai papers tend to be more of, I did a thing and I'll evaluate the thing. Okay, so what we have from the discussion is we had maybe kind of 3 different points, I think. I think we had points on the design considerations, so the actual design and choice of system that was being used. We've got some discussions on the methodology in terms of how they actually went about doing that, and we've got some discussion on limitations. So the first of those, design considerations. Should probably get a nice cup for these instead of just sitting with my iron brew all the time. Yeah, at least it's not beer. Okay, design consideration. So a lot of people commented on kind of what is the real life use of this thing. So the first thing that people tended to pick up was, if I'm going around with a massive device on my head, I've already signalled that I'm different, because HoloLens are not common devices. So yes, that is a problem, in that it does draw attention to people. But then there's this dichotomy of, do you only design for technology when technology's here? Or do you design for the potential of technology and let the technology catch up? Because then once the new technology, the new headset that just looks like, a pair of glasses, once that's available, the software's already there. So there is sometimes this kind of, we've done it on this because it's what we have, but we have this vision for the future that it's going to be different. And I think that's what's here in this case. So you've got the device is uncomfortable for a long period of time. So in terms of like the potential as a commercial system or a system to be used now, generally the feeling was that was quite limited. There's also the issue of the actual physical design. So if I hold my paper up again, so this here is the, wrong way. This here is what it would look like. No, other side. So you have someone who's wearing the device, and this is what they see in the background. So they can see within this window, that's the field of view for the HoloLens. There's 2 people having a conversation, and there's speech coming up behind them. Now that speech was either white on black or black on white. So a lot of people kind of said, well, actually, what if I'm in a busy background environment? What if I am in amongst trees? I'm in a forest. What if I'm in a busy place with lots of people moving about behind me? I'm in a crowd. does that still stand up? Is it too distracting for me to constantly be looking for those utterances next to someone's face when actually there's a lot of faces? So there was some kind of discussion about whether that would hold up in the real world environment, because obviously we have here a lab study. Okay, the next one was about kind of the fact that it is a lab study. So it's set up on a very stark white background with two individuals. And how realistic is that study for any group conversation? Very often do you find like two people on one side and then one person on the other side? Like that's an interview. That's not a group discussion. So maybe, as a lab study, I think it's a valid thing what they've done, that they've assessed the interface to see whether or not it works within the lab. But I think they need to have some more future work, which then goes out to use it within a real setting. Even if it is like standing in the street and trying to have that conversation, does it still work with those additional distractions? And this is where we need to be really careful about what we accept as, true, quote unquote, within HCI research, in that was it a real life study and has all of these confounding variables like distractors in there, or was it a lab study and therefore everything was, perfect in terms of measurement for the study? So being aware of whether we have a lab study or an in the wild study is an important element. And there was also the kind of idea of the fact that it's a noisy environment. Will that technically make a difference? So currently the Google API is recording things that happen, but if it's two people having a conversation, it's probably not going to be very much overwhelmed. Whereas if I'm walking around and there's lots of background noise, will it still cope with that kind of interaction, and will it get the information it needs to make the subtitles? So that's probably all I've got for design considerations. But it was really interesting, actually, the kind of awareness of, the technology's cool, but it's probably not ready for public. And like the people in the HoloLens project and the QMB, like they attract a lot of attention, right, when they're wandering around wearing a HoloLens. And what happens is you go and ask the person, hey, what's that thing? You're not interested in the person, you're interested in the tech. And so it detracts from kind of this sense of an individual, and that individual identity is kind of overtaken by the technology that they're so visibly wearing. So that was design considerations. The next one, 2 of 3, is methodology. So there are a number of methodological queries that I have throughout the paper, and this is because it's not been written with a complete level of detail that's required. So what I'm asking myself at the back of my head while I'm reading papers is, could I replicate this? Could I take what the information is here and then find my own participants, have them meet their participant information, whatever? Could I replicate it and potentially get the same results? And if you're thinking of something like life sciences, obviously this is super important, and you have to provide all of that information, because it is possible for people to go and replicate and see if they get the same results. In human studies, it's a bit harder because, people are people, they have opinions and they have behaviours that are not constrained by things that you can control. But it is important to make sure that you document all of the things that you did, because all of the things that you did may have influenced that end result. It may have influenced what the participant drew in a co-design session. It may have influenced how receptive they were to the new technology during an evaluation study. It can influence so many things. So in the case of this paper, they have put together, like, they've described all of their participants. Let me get to the section where they have participants. Yeah, so the first section, they have indicated that they have 8 participants, 3 of which are female, and they're in an age range from 18 to 39, and they've got varying levels of hearing loss, right? So it's actually quite a diverse group. So a lot of people asked, does it matter how many participants there are? Yes and no, it just depends how you present it. So if you do 8 participants and you present it and you're very clear that this information applies to these 8 participants. If I was to take 8 participants and then say, oh, I have a result that applies to all people who are deaf and hard of hearing, then that's obviously not sensible. If you're doing statistics, I want to say that around 12 is the minimum to do meaningful statistics, but the more varied your population, the harder you're going to find that. Because, like in statistics, you're looking for a nice normal curve to show that you have a representative population. And if you don't, you have to start using really varied tests that make different assumptions and so on. So when you're doing, right, how many people went and found out what Friedman was? How many people went and looked at those tests and went, okay, what's the best answer? So if I find, so the course book, because I'm prepared and I brought it home. The course book, that has a section in it which is all about quantitative stuff. So if anyone is interested, you can have a look at that. It is chapter 5, designing HCI experiments, and chapter 6, hypothesis testing. Chapter 6 is like that quantitative analysis. So, reverse back. The co-design interviews and process, they have all this information about their participants, which is great because I know exactly who this applies to. They tell me that we based our semi-structured interview format from prior work by Hong et al., reference 18. But if you based it on that, then presumably you changed something. So you've got to tell me what you changed, because now I'm stuck. Stage 1, I can't do anything because I know that they based it on that, but they could have changed anything, and I have no idea what it is. I also have no information on how the interviews were analysed. Like, I would assume it was some kind of thematic analysis, but I don't actually know what questions were asked. I know what topics they covered, but I don't know what questions were asked. I don't know how long the interviews were. I don't know anything really about how they were analysed. There's lots of authors. Was it one author or multiple authors? How did they make sure that the multiple authors were consistent? So all of these questions are coming to my head while I'm looking at it. And that's what a critical evaluation is. It's about taking what someone's given you and not to be distrustful, not to say, oh, I don't trust what they did, but to be able to say, well, I have questions about it and I have queries and there's potential for misunderstanding, and I've recognised that potential, and I want to make sure that I'm on the same track as they are, or I think they've missed something crucial here, right? They did their interviews in a coffee shop, and that can cause problems with people who are deaf and hard of hearing because they're in a noisy environment, and that was not a good place to have them. And so can you really trust these interviews because you've put someone in a difficult situation before they've even started doing them? So being able to ask all of these questions is sometimes I know comes as quite negative that I have all of these questions or statements like they didn't tell me this, they didn't tell me that, but actually when I'm reviewing, I'm kind of aware of that, and I often have one pass that's negative, and then my second pass is deliberately positive, so that I can, to people who write papers for conferences, if I'm reviewing, I want to give them something that's very balanced, and I want to give them something that's useful in terms of, we need more information about this, but also this bit is great, do not touch it. Because one of the things we spoke about was, would they have been asked to include that information by reviewers and they didn't? Well, they could have been, but you also don't know what was removed after a review. Because if a reviewer might have said, so if you think of figure 3, I think it is, it's quite big. So if a reviewer said to you, oh, you've got to make some space you should really include a picture to show people what you mean by these descriptors, who's to say what came out of there? The reviewer is only checking for the thing that they requested. So that can sometimes be a little bit of a hole in the reviewing process. Okay, so we've got design considerations, methodology. The third one is limitations. No, third one. Third one, limitations. So if I am looking at a paper, I want to see somewhere that they have acknowledged the limitations of what it is that they've done. So, for example, this paper, some limitations are that it's being conducted in Mandarin. So, I all of the participants were Mandarin speakers. I assume that it was conducted in Mandarin, although I don't think it actually tells me. But that's a limitation in terms of how that text is presented, because you can convey so much more in a number of Chinese characters than the English equivalent would be many more characters. So that's a challenge. So there's some kind of linguistics understanding required to overcome that. There might be other challenges. So there is culture. So the use of speech bubbles in Asian culture may be more prominent because they have more of like an anime culture, or they have more of a graphic novel culture which uses these things, and so people are more familiar with them. Would you get the same result if you sat it down in front of 8 Scottish people who were deaf and hard of hearing? Would we draw the same thing as someone drew from, in this case, Taiwan? So that's a challenge. Um, there's some issues around limitations around the population. So the average age for the final evaluation, I think, was 23. Oh, here we go. No. Evaluation methodology. Yep, average age 23. So that's actually quite young. They had a much broader range in the kind of middle section, where it was kind of like about 20 to 55 or around that. Like there's some variation there, but I mean, this definitely does not apply to the elderly population. So it would be worth having some section in there which kind of discusses, and it's fine to have limitations, and I think it makes you a better researcher if you can acknowledge those limitations and work past them. So there's no reason why you can't say this has a limitation because the number of participants were young, and we have not explored this within older adults. However, there's always a however, technology acceptance within younger adults is higher, and therefore they are more likely to adopt any technology that is developed. So your research is limited, but I have some kind of, not a reason or a justification, but I can link it to something I know. I can link it to something that makes sense, rather than just saying, well, I only did it for 23-year-olds and oh well, right? Can you link it to some kind of reasoning? And that's what's the critical factor about the whole thing. They have some sections at the end which could be limitations. The captioning, they have contributions for hearing, they have emotions and the fact that emotions aren't conveyed, and so it's this kind of like sterile thing. But I mean, there's so many more avenues that this can go. Their future work section is quite short, really, and additional next steps. People should look at different languages and should look at different devices and should look at visualizing emotions. Actually, that's quite a small amount of things when you think of all that could happen. I mean, you could have like eye gaze to look at whether people are detracted from the. So there's lots of work on positioning of subtitles. When you put them near to someone, does the peripheral vision kick in and you can get them rather than them being kind of like down here at the bottom of the screen or whatever. So lots of potential ideas and thoughts that I've had. It actually made me go back and read reference 5. So if you can find reference 5, that is a good read. It is Dynamic Subtitles, the User Experience. So Mike Crabbe wrote part of that while he was working with the BBC as part of his PhD. So very interesting. And if you're lucky, you end up in the kind of testing for it, which is good. So hopefully, I've now rabbited on for about 25 minutes. So hopefully that is a nice overview of kind of the discussions that we were having the other day. Obviously, it's not the full discussion, but it's enough to get you starting thinking on your own kind of thoughts around the paper. There is some worksheets to get you thinking along these kind of lines of the discussion that we've been kind of, well, I've been having with myself right now. If you go to week 9, there's some sheets that have just questions that you can see, can I get the relevant information? Is there a shortcoming, or is it a good area of the paper, or whatever? So please go on there, have a look. If you are interested in just finding more stuff from, CAI or Assets, which is the accessibility one, dl.acm.org, that is the digital library for the ACM, and you can just go on there and search for people you've heard of, search for topics you're interested in, and just pull some stuff out and have a look. If you're interested in, you're looking ahead to projects, have a look at that as well and see, are there kind of keywords that I can put in there and see what sort of previous work has been done, might give you some ideas. So that'll keep people entertained. All right, I shall find a bit to stop. Yep. I'll go and upload this just now, so you'll see it online. But yeah, keep reading, stay safe, speak to you soon.